general audiences, and then we'll have wrap-up questions. So I am going to ask you guys to participate today. So I am going to ask you questions, and you will have some time where I'm going to ask you to talk to someone near you. So let's go ahead right now and just identify one or two people near you that you can chat with. So if you are not sitting near someone, please find one or two people to talk with, and maybe say your name if you don't know each other yet. I know that can be If you are talking to people and you see someone around you who's not, perhaps reach out to them and say, hey, you want to talk to us? I also recommend having somewhere to write things down. I like to write pen and paper, that way I'm not distracted by my screen. Because I am going to ask you guys to think today. I think it's helpful when prompted to think about something to jot ideas down. So I would recommend having a place to write things. So a couple of things about the WRC. We are a place on campus where you can get help with your writing. We have really great consultants who are come from multiple disciplines, speak different languages, who are really good about guiding you through the writing process in a way that is comforting and safe. So it's a place where you can make mistakes and really work to grow your skills as well as your individual pieces of writing. So we have 3 different types of appointment in person. We don't have in-person appointments this summer, but in the regular school year, we do have in-person appointments. We're located in Cameron Hall. We also have a satellite location in Atkins Library. We also have Zoom conferences as well as asynchronous e-tutoring. That's where you send in a paper and you get feedback from a tutor that way. In the summer, we only offer our online options. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how to make an appointment at the end of today? Yes, at the end of today. So let's take a couple minutes. It helps when learning about a new skill to think about what you already know about that skill or about that type of writing. So let's take a few minutes and you can jot some ideas down or you can just think about it. What do you already know about abstracts? And I'll prompt you in a minute to share, but let's just think on our own for a couple minutes. What do you already know about abstracts? Okay, does anyone want to share anything you already know about abstract? Feel free to yell out or raise your hands. Yep.
This would just provide a synopsis of a research paper?
Yep.
A research article?
Exactly. They provide a synopsis of a research article. Yes.
It could be it like includes like pieces of like everything in the article. So like could be the intro, the methods, the results, the discussion. It can also be very grainy in terms of like terminology as well.
Excellent, that's great. I love what you said there, because I think some folks are like, well, an abstract is like an introduction. But differently than an introduction, an abstract includes all of the elements of the research. So you're going to have a little smattering of everything in there. Yeah, good. Jared?
I thought that an abstract was the summary of your paper, but really has a lot of the technical language removed as abstract at the end.
Yeah, excellent. That's really good. Especially today, we're going to be really focusing in on how to write an abstract for a general audience, where we're really going to try to avoid that overly technical language that like a lay person or someone who's not specific in your fields might be confused by or not able to understand. Good. Other things you know about abstracts? Awesome. So yes, just like you guys said, an abstract is a quick overview of research. It's a short summary of research, usually about a paragraph. It's 150 to 300 words. You find abstracts in proposals, academic articles, conference presentations, dissertations, theses, and books. You see abstracts everywhere. And it may seem like, oh, okay, easy peasy, that's short. I'm desperately afraid I'm going to fall off the stage, by the way. It's not a very big line. And I used to teach high school, so I'm used to like getting really close to people, closer and closer as I talk. So hopefully I don't die today. Okay, so anyway, so it may seem like it's very easy to write, it's short, but actually it can be really hard to do this well. I read a lot of ineffective abstracts that leave me as a reader kind of feeling like, I don't really know what you're doing, I didn't really follow what you're saying here, because you have not a lot of space to kind of talk about a lot. So we'll talk about kind of how to do that effectively today. So the purpose of an abstract is a couple of things. One, to pique a reader's interest. You want someone to keep reading your research after they've read your abstract. You want to give your readers a general understanding of your research really quickly, right? So they're probably not sitting down with an abstract ready to really like take their time and soak in every word you're saying. They want to understand what you're saying quickly. Provide readers a kind of skeleton for your research, and prepare the readers for the complexity of your methods, results, and discussion. So the abstract should not be overly complex, but you're kind of preparing the reader to engage with the complexity that is to come. So we're going to look at an example. This is an abstract I just randomly found. I don't know why I chose a management journal. I'm sure I had a reason at the time, but I did this like 4 years ago. And I did not particularly choose an abstract I thought was awesome or bad. I just randomly found an abstract. So this is from a published article. So let's read through it. I'm going to read it out loud, and I want you to think about, as I'm reading it, what the abstract is doing. So what is each sentence doing? How is it kind of engaging you as the reader? What are you learning about the study? Okay. So this is an article titled "You Don't Forget Your Roots: The Influence of CEO Social Class Background on Strategic Risk-Taking," from the Academy of Management Journal. Social class is increasingly recognized as a powerful force in people's lives. Yet, despite the long and extensive stream of research on the upper echelons of organizations, we know little about how executives' formative childhood experiences with social class influence their strategic choices. In this study, we investigate the influence of chief executive officers, or CEOs, perceived social class origins on firm risk-taking. We also explore the moderating influences of other important career experiences in the form of elite education and diverse functional backgrounds. Our theory and findings highlight that an executive's social class origins have a lasting and varying impact on his or her preferences, affecting his or her tendency to take risks. By examining this novel managerial characteristic, we offer important implications for theorizing about social class in upper echelons. So what are some things you think are happening here? What is the writer doing? Yes?
does it have a very high barrier of entry for figuring out what you're trying to talk about?
Yeah,
Not the numbers or acronyms or anything.
Absolutely, excellent. Not a lot of numbers, not a lot of acronyms. Like, there are words we may not totally know, but we can get the gist of what we're reading here. Yeah, yes.
The flow definitely keeps you hooked onto it.
Yeah, absolutely. It flows really well. It does all the things an abstract can do. It's supposed to do, almost. What are some of those things that it's doing? Yes.
Well, I guess from what I'm noticing too, it starts off by building, it starts off by building, kind of like setting the stage, and then it touches on different topics that they explore, and then a couple of theories that they propose, the main ones.
Yeah, absolutely. It builds. That's a great point. You were saying that too. It builds. So the first sentence is really very broad. Social class is increasingly recognized as a powerful force in people's lives. For us as a reader, like you said over here, it's a very simple sentence. It's not hard to understand. And it's just kind of easing us into the topic. The main topic we're talking about is what? Social class, right? So it's kind of easing us in. And then we start to get narrower and narrower. So you might think about this as kind of like an upside down triangle. We start really broad, we get narrower and narrower as we go, and by the end, we kind of end at the point, which is the research, right? Other things you're noticing, what about this sentence? Yet, despite the long and extensive stream of research, what's the purpose of this sentence, you think? Yes?
Usually when you're doing research, you want to find a gap in research, so this is where their research fills that gap.
Exactly. This is a gap or a problem. Okay, I'm going to give you a fancy word for what that is in a minute. But yeah, exactly. Anything else you want to add before I show you, I kind of break it down a little more?
It definitely like in the last sentence there where it says by examining the novel managerial characters, basically the rest of it, it's basically explaining like the purpose of like their methods.
Yes.
For whatever they're researching.
Good, yeah. The last sentence is the purpose, the implications, the kind of so what. All right, great. Y'all did an awesome job. So, broken down a little more, the first line we talked about introduces the broad topic, which is social class. Mm-hmm. The second line you point out is the gap. Kind of maybe a fancy word for that is exigence. I like to use this word, but it basically kind of means the problem, the need for research. And that is going to be dependent on your audience, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So right here, this is in an academic journal. The problem is a gap in research, okay? Not all audiences are going to care about a gap in research, right? Some audiences are going to care more about like the bigger sort of social problem, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The third and fourth lines state the goal of the study, the goals of the study. The fifth line broadly overviews the findings, and then we end with the implications. I do think there's something missing here. Does anyone else find something to be missing? Anything you kind of wanted to know that you didn't get from the abstract? Yes?
Methodology.
Methodology. We don't really have anything about methodology, right? I would like to know who is the study population? Like, what did you actually do? Did you survey them? Did you observe them? I think we need a little bit more here about the methodology. And we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty. We don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, but some kind of indication of what you actually did would be helpful. So, like I said, just kind of making that into an outline, these are sort of the big things all abstract or effective abstract should do. Provide some sort of context, ease our readers in with a general kind of intro to the topic. We want an exigence or a statement of the problem, and again, this is going to depend on your audience. We'll talk about that again in a little bit. We want our research question or the goal of our study. We want our research and analytic methods, research or analytic methods, so that's going to depend on like what your field of study is. Methods look different, obviously, with different disciplines. We have an overview of our results, and then a sentence about the significance or implications. And I pull a lot from this website over here. University of Wisconsin-Madison's Writing Center has a really nice a couple pages dedicated to abstracts, so I would recommend if you want to learn more, that's a really good resource. Does that make sense? It's kind of, in some ways, abstracts are kind of great because they're sort of formulaic. Like, you don't need to try to go off the beaten path with abstracts. You can kind of stick to this sort of formula. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into disciplinary versus general audience abstracts, because for the this summer program, you are going to have to write a general abstract. And disciplinary and general abstracts are quite different, okay? Yes, they do these same things, but they do them a little differently, okay? So, audience obviously matters. I want you to take a minute, and you can think or you can jot some ideas down. But what do you think the difference between these two types of abstracts would be? Now let me specify, when I say general here, I do mean like a general academic audience. These are going to be people who are academic, but they might not be in your specific field. So we don't just mean anybody. We mean a general academic audience. So take a couple minutes and think about what you might do differently in with these two audiences, and then we'll talk together. So right now you're just thinking and jotting some ideas down. So what do you guys think? What might be the difference here? Yes?
So for professional, for professional disciplinary audiences, people in that field. So say, for example, my concentration is biology. So like if I presented like my research to basically just the people in my lab or like people in like my department, they would have an idea like what I'm covering. Like they have a better idea in terms of like jargon and such. Whereas as a general audience, if I like presented something in like my biology jargon, they'll be like, "What the heck are you talking about?"
Right, exactly. You can assume a level of understanding, right, in your disciplinary audience. That might mean you don't have to define certain terms, or you don't have to explain certain concepts. Yeah, exactly. Other things yes.
I don't know if it's right, but I would expect the disciplinary one to kind of connect itself to.
It eased into it, kind of like into the research itself. I was like, okay, this is much better, much more audience friendly.
Okay, good. Yes.
Do you have to introduce more like protein kinases, which were the confusing letters? It also explained that it wasn't protein.
Okay. So there's more explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yes.
If I was reading this and I don't know what G protein is or the different kinases are, I would feel much more comfortable Googling or looking up what's presented here than the other one where it feels like I'm just stepping into the middle of a conversation that I don't understand. Here I know what the big thing to look up next is.
Good point. That's a really good point, because the question I'm going to ask you guys in a minute, I'll ask you in a minute. Yes.
Oh, never mind. I think you have to go ahead.
Okay, good. Some of the people who are on the lower end, what do you think are still issues here? Yes.
I would say that last sentence is still like
It's a very long sentence, yeah. I think we could probably break that up, especially at the end. Our readers might still be a little tired, because as you pointed out, not everything is defined, right? If I'm a lay audience, there's still things I'm not gonna know. But I'm not necessarily jumping in the deep end. They're not throwing me into the deep end, right? But they might still not be throwing in where I can touch. I still probably need to do a little thinking and digging. Other people who are kind of on the lower end, what else? Yes?
I think just by...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, Well, just by the very nature of the site, it's kind of dense already. So I don't know if there's like any way to make it easier and more accessible.
That is a great point. And that was a question I was actually going to ask in a minute. And it's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it. But it's something you always have to think about when you are doing some sort of dense research. How much can you actually explain in an abstract? You might not be able to define every term. Like, it still might have to be a little scientific, right? And you might have to make some concessions. And we're gonna look at one abstract from a student in this program who was doing a dense study that did a really good job of condensing it. And that might help us kind of see how to do that well. I do think that they could probably still make some moves here to make it more understandable. I think it's a lot more understandable. But that's something you gotta think about, right? Sometimes you're gonna have to explain a process that not everybody might understand. We have to do it in the most reader-friendly way that we can, but actually, I really like the way that you identified it as, like, you know, you may not understand the terms, but you at least know where to start, right? You're not just completely overwhelmed here. So I think you put it really well. So let's look at a couple of examples. We pretty much went over that. Let's look at a couple of examples from people in this program who I think wrote really effective abstracts. And we're gonna first look at one, well, we'll look at them together, okay? So I'm gonna read this to you again. I know I've read to you a lot and we've looked at a lot of abstracts, but I think examples help. So as we're reading this, I want you to think about what the writer does to cater to a general audience, okay? Okay, window collisions are among the most common causes of death for birds worldwide. Is this new information, anybody? Is this new? Yeah. I know, the first time I read this abstract, I was like, oh God, the birds. With urbanization on the rise, window collisions may increasingly become a persistent threat to bird populations. Bird window collisions most often occur at low-rise buildings where over half, or 56%, of the collisions involve buildings that are 4 to 11 stories high, while the remaining collisions, or 44%, occur at 1 to 3 story buildings. We collected preliminary data for the occurrence of bird window collisions on a campus where vegetation and low-rise buildings are interspersed. We monitored 22 building sites, probably should be sites, I need to edit this. Building sites at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte that were deemed most likely for bird collisions based on the number and size of windows, vegetation cover, and bird activity. We walked along the building sides slowly over an average of 5 minutes, looking for dead or injured birds at each site 3 times per week. The preliminary results of this assessment showed that of the 680 monitoring surveys performed thus far, there were 26 deaths involving 10 species, 2 of which were unknown. The species most at risk for bird collisions were American robins, or Turdus migratorius, with 10 deaths, and mourning doves, or Zenaida macrora, with 4 deaths. This is consistent with the abundance of these species. These results suggest that locations with thick patches of dead vegetation nearest the building may be areas of concern for bird collisions. Sides of buildings with dense vegetation patches may be good candidates for the use of bird-friendly glass in windows to reduce bird window collisions. Things that you think this writer does well. Yes?
I just had like a general just questions, probably just like English.
Yeah.
Does it really matter if you write out the actual number or just the word itself in an abstract? Does it matter?
I don't know if this program has a guide for that or if it matters. Disciplinary. It's disciplinary or even journal or venue specific.
Yeah.
So, or like if you're using a citation style, like APA for instance will tell you when to do which.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. Other things that you think, or things you think they did well. Very understandable abstract. Yes?
I like the use of like the general general names of the birds and the scientific names of the birds, because it makes it easy to read if I don't know the names of the scientific names of birds, but it's also there like for people who do know it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's good. It's nice to include the.
Absolutely. And it's kind of a good rhetorical move. It's like persuasive because you're like exercising your knowledge, right? Like I know what the fancy terms are, even if I don't want to just say the fancy terms, right? Yeah, good.
I also like how it kind of contextualizes like the area of concern. Like the second sentence, for example, basically mentions like what contributes to like the problem, or like one of the factors that goes into the problem, and like also at the end where it like basically gives a solution. Like it basically presents like environmental concerns with it.
Absolutely. One thing that I think this does really well that you want to consider when you're writing your abstract is it makes the problem something any reader can care about, and not just a problem that readers who study birds would care about, right? The problem is that birds are dying. If you were going to write this to a disciplinary audience, the problem might be research has not studied this specific thing enough. But like a general audience doesn't really care that much about that. We want to know like what's going on with the birds, they're dying, what can we do about it? Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, I thought that was someone making a bird call. Okay.
It's a problem.
Sounds like a bird kind of. Okay, so some good things here. There's no disciplinary knowledge is needed to understand this at all. There's no jargon, or if there's a little jargon, it's contextualized. It's written very clearly, very concisely. We don't really have any overly complex sentences. And when it does use numbers, it uses numbers we can conceptualize, right? It's not like the square root of blah, 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 or some random number. It's like easy numbers that we get, okay? Now let's look at one more. This is the last one we're gonna look at, I promise. Let's go through what it does. It does the things in a very nice order. So we've got broad topic, we've got background information, we've got a really nice explanation of the methodology, we've got findings, and then we've got implications. So it follows that formula very well. All right, so this is the last one we're going to look at, okay? And I really like this one because this one is clearly describing something that's very methodologically dense, and I think they do it in a very clear way, okay? All right, and this is the last time I'm going to read to you. People should be able to trust that their drinking water is clean, but sometimes water filters aren't enough to keep everything out. Bad chemicals such as per and poly blah blah substances, or PFAS, require special methods to remove them from the water, such as running them through special beads called ion exchange resins. These resins catch PFAS compounds as the water flows through and later gets washed by a washing solution to be reused. Different resins have different levels of effectiveness of removing PFAS from contaminated waters. The current washing solution being used isn't strong enough to rinse the PFAS off the most effective resins, leading to these resins becoming a single-use product. This led researchers to ask the question, are there alternative washing solutions to remove PFAS compounds from contaminated resin to reuse the resin? To test this theory, a portion of water was pre-contaminated with 6 PFAS compounds, and resin was added to the mixture for contamination. Then, the spiked resin was separated out into 10 portions, and 5 different washing solutions were applied to 2 portions of resin each. Samples were collected each step of the process in order to analyze the results in a separate machine. From those samples, researchers found that the stronger the metal chloride in the different washing solutions, the more effective the solution was in removing PFAS from the resin. This means that the resin may be able to be reused more than once, reducing the amount of waste this type of ion exchange resin produces. The more frequently the resin can be reused, the less waste that will be produced during the filtration process. Drinking can be both clean while producing less waste to clean. are some things that you like about this one?
It's a relatable topic.
Very relatable topic. You may not think that testing resins is relatable to you if you're not in that discipline, but they do a really good job of making us care about it by talking about clean drinking water and the environmental impact, right? Those are things that anybody should and can care about. Yeah. Yes?
They break down like pretty much almost all of the jargon that would be there.
Yeah, there's like basically no jargon here except PFAS, but I think they do a really smart thing in the second sentence and just say bad chemicals, such as PFAS. Like, you don't even know what PFAS is, don't worry about it, just know that it's bad. And they've linked that term with bad in our minds. And that might seem simple, like overly simplistic, but I actually think it works really well here. Because for a lay audience, we just know that's bad, and that's the only thing we really need to care about. So I think that's a really smart move they do here. Other things that you liked. Yeah, I think this is a good example if you yourself are involved in a project that's super complex. This is a good example of how to kind of break that down for a reader and make it less complex. So some things that it does well: little to no disciplinary knowledge is needed. There's really no jargon except PFAS, and they do a good job of identifying what that is. It's written very clearly and concisely. It's written very simply. Like, we might look at this and think, we want our abstracts to sound more fancy and use bigger words, but you actually don't want to do that here. Your ideas are what are the complex things. We want to use language that's simple enough for our readers to kind of understand. And it follows that formula. I don't think we need to go through that again. So a couple other important considerations, and then I just want to share a couple random things to think about. Not random, but a couple of other things to think about when you're writing your abstracts. But some important considerations to remember is that your abstract should stand alone. So your reader shouldn't have to look at your paper poster to get the gist of your research. Abstracts generally do not include citations, so the focus should be on your work. Abstracts are context specific, and that's kind of what we were mentioning with how to write out the numbers. So depending on where you are writing an abstract, that's going to depend. That's going to dictate the format, elements, etc. And I often get a lot of questions about verb tense and pronoun use in your abstract. So I do want to touch on that a little bit, because you probably saw in the abstract we looked at, some people are using I, some people are not using I, some people are using we, and that can be confusing of what you're supposed to do in your abstract. So I want to talk about a couple things, but specify that the verb tense and the pronouns you use or don't use are going to really depend on your discipline. But basically, there are a couple ways to use or not use pronouns in your, and when I say pronouns, I mean I, me, he, she, they. So first person is where you use I or we in your writing. The first person is often used in the humanities, sometimes used in the social sciences, typically avoided in STEM fields. So for example, in this study, we investigate the influence of chief executive officers' perceived social class origin. So that is bringing the researcher right into the writing, saying we, okay? If first person is not allowed in your discipline, which for a lot of you guys it won't be, there are a couple things you can do to avoid first person. One thing you can do is to use third person, or you can refer to the study itself. So for example, the authors investigate the influence of parents on social acceptance, or the present study examined the relations among the psychological factors. So actually using the words the study or the authors is one way to do that. The other way to do this is to use passive voice. That is to take the subject right out of the sentence. So in first person, the subject of our sentence is we. In third person or the study, the subject is the author's or the present study. In passive voice, you take the subject right out. So for instance, you can say, data were collected from undergraduate students using surveys. I don't identify who is doing the collecting, I just specify that data were collected. Or, the influence of parents on social acceptance was investigated, okay? If you're in the humanities, we kind of try to avoid passive voice, but it's often used in social sciences, it's often used in STEM fields to kind of take out the need to use I or we. Any idea why do you think the STEM fields want to take out I and we?
Because it might indicate that there's like one person behind the study and it could lead to a bunch of questions on bias.
Yeah, bias, exactly. It's trying to make the study look more objective, right?
Maintain formalities.
And it can maintain formality, yeah, absolutely. Cool. This is something, if you're like, I don't have a clue what she's talking about, this is something to absolutely talk to your advisor or your the PI you're working with and see what is the, how do you do it in your field, because fields are all different. All right, we are coming toward the ends of our time. So I want you to take a couple minutes and you can jot this down or you can just think about it, but reflect on what we talked about today. And think about what information you want to take with you when writing your own abstract. Please consider coming to the Writing Center. The best way to make sure that your abstract is readable and understandable by a general audience is to actually ask a general audience. And that's what folks at the Writing Center can do. They can read your abstract and tell you, okay, I didn't quite understand this part was too complex, can you expand here? Or, hey, it looks really good. You can make an appointment by going to uncc.mywconline.com. That is our scheduling system. And you can also just Google UNC Charlotte Writing Center and we'll pop up. And I hope that we see you in the center. As you guys I have just a couple minutes if anyone has questions.
She, and I've seen this in like a various amount of articles where it's either they will use he or she, but I don't see a lot of use of they often. Is this like I know that for older articles, he or she is a lot more common. Mm-hmm. Is that still is it sorry, I'm very discipline specific, or I don't know where it matters that specifically.
So most, that's a great question. So back in the day, people would just use he, and then we moved to he and she, and using they, I don't know all of the formats, but like MLA and APA in Chicago have all codified the use of they as an acceptable pronoun use for the singular when you're talking about the singular, because it is easier than he and she. He or she. Now when I read he or she, I'm like, oh my god, that's so cumbersome. So it really depends on the style you're writing in, but I think most places they has been codified as an appropriate term to use for a singular pronoun. Yeah, good question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you guys so much, and thanks.